Hi, I'm James McGuire here at the RSA conference with Patrick Harding, Chief Product Architect at Ping Identity. Patrick, thanks for talking with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, I know we're going to talk about identity fraud and what companies can do to protect against identity fraud, but first, please tell us about what Ping Identity does. How does Ping Identity serve its clients?
So briefly, Ping is an identity and access management vendor. We focus on providing authentication, verification, authorization technologies to enterprises for both their workforce as well as their customers and consumers.
All right, so Ping Identity has a new report. It's about identity fraud, especially with the rise of artificial intelligence. What are some key takeaways from the report?
So I think there's recognition that when you're talking about identity verification, which is the ability to verify users' identities sort of online, that organizations aren't doing enough of that. The demand for it has gone up significantly, mostly because either businesses have gone digital and are now interacting with their customers, basically online, or their workforce is gone remote. So they're now dealing with their employees and workers from a remote standpoint, to the point where, listen, you could actually hire an employee and they actually never, they might not show up to an office or meet any other employees for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, something like that.
So that opens the door to identity fraud, perhaps.
Yes, exactly, in both cases.
So in light of the report's findings, what can companies do to prevent identity fraud? I think that's a real issue for companies.
Identity fraud sort of manifests in a couple of ways. We tend to break it down into sort of two areas. One is protecting you from synthetic and fake accounts, new account fraud, like what people do when they're setting up an account for the first time. And then there's protecting, helping organizations protect against something called account takeover, which is where the fraudster can actually take over a existing user account. Again, whether that's a consumer account or a workforce account. Another one that a little outside of that we see a lot of, though, is also the notion of scams, where people are being defrauded out of different things by being made to believe that the person they're interacting with is someone they know, and they then sort of do things, to basically move money or, do stuff essentially against their will. A sort of form of social engineering, actually, in that way.
You mean using a deepfake or not necessarily?
Well, traditionally, scams might have involved, phone calls or emails to basically make you believe something, okay? Deepfakes and Gen AI has actually just made those scams even harder to detect and easier to implement. So that now, rather than getting an email, you might get a phone call or a voicemail with a deepfake voice that you recognize, or you might see a video with a deepfake video that you recognize, or even phishing emails, where these phishing emails are now so targeted and are written sort of in the flavor of the person writing it. Say, take Andre Durand, our CEO. I sort of know his writing style.
Sure.
A Gen AI can now generate, fake emails that sort of feel like he wrote it, basically.
Yeah.
So.
Well, did the survey say anything about deepfakes?
It did. It said that, generally, everybody recognizes what they are and that they're a risk. And sort of approximately 50% of organizations are sort of recognizing we probably couldn't, detect deepfakes, essentially, and we'd be vulnerable. I don't know what the other 50% is doing or saying.
Maybe a little naive, perhaps.
I think they got their head in the sand, actually, yeah.
Okay.
So basically, I think, I'd be very surprised if they actually had solutions to this, because there aren't many out there right now.
Those would be the companies that are like, we got fooled by the deepfake.
Yes, yeah. Exactly, yes.
How confident are companies in thinking that they really can protect against a fraud identity tag?
It's again, from the survey, probably half the companies feel like they're doing that okay. I think it's a continuum, it's shades of gray here. I mean, people are relying on technologies like multi-factor authentication, stuff like that, which is a great way to basically sort of deal with certain things. But when it gets to deepfakes, again, we're basically now talking about communication channels that we've tended to just rely on sort of implicit trust. If I get a phone call, I recognize the voice, I'm okay with it. Sure. If I see a Zoom call and I recognize the face, I'm okay with it. If I get an email, and that email basically sounds like it's from the person because the email address says it's from them,
Sure.
trust it. So the tech, these things are only going to get better, more used, stuff like that, and it's going to become a cat and mouse game, I think, to basically sort of deal with that a little bit. To be honest, we're going to have to do a lot to educate and train users to say, look, you're not going to recognize and understand these deepfakes. You need to be aware of them. You're not going to recognize them. You now need to think, all right, if that message that I got, that voicemail that I got, is asking me to do something of a sort of a higher risk type of transaction, move money, reset a password, something like that, I likely need to verify.
Sure.
And basically establish explicit trust that actually this is occurring and this is necessary and stuff like that.
Right.
So there's a lot of education that's going to have to occur, unfortunately.
So what's your major recommendation? What do you want to leave companies with in terms of protecting themselves against deepfakes and AI? And in particular, how can Ping Identity help with this?
Well, I mean, there's all the baseline stuff we've been doing for a number of years. I mean, there's, everybody should be using strong authentication now. Whether that's, one-time passwords, whether that's MFA, things like that. There are things you can now do around, to identify the user initially around identity verification. You can start to basically establish who they are by basically matching a selfie photo with a driver's license, like a real driver's license or a government credential. Okay. Very hard for a Gen AI to reproduce a driver's license.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Okay. All right. So, but again, those things tend to have sort of friction. Like, you're not going to basically take a photo of your driver's license every time you want to log in.
Sure.
All right. Or every time you need to interact with a service and stuff like that, basically. So what this is sort of shifting towards, and this is the other part of the report, is the notion of decentralized identity, which is where my identity information is actually stored in my smartphone and can only be unlocked by me. And
with a biometric?
Biometric, yeah.
Okay.
But it could be a local biometric,
okay.
like a Face ID type of thing.
Yep.
Okay. And that information is secured with a private key, like a cryptographic private key, that is extremely, extremely difficult to reproduce. So no Gen AI is going to reproduce that. And now my identity can be shared from my decentralized identity wallet on my smartphone with different services. Could be with services, or it also could be peer-to-peer. So if I'm talking to you on the phone and I'm not sure it's you, all right, I might ask you, hey, send me ping me a notification through your wallet that this is really you, basically. So you can do that sort of thing out of band. So we actually think that decentralized identity is really going to help deal with a number of these issues we're seeing right now, because it's essentially taking things sort of more out of band. And we're eliminating the implicit trust that we've had on some of these channels where deepfakes are being used, and replacing it with sort of an out-of-band explicit trust, essentially, using decentralized identity.
How close or far away are we from that world of decentralized identity?
So it's early, but it's growing. And again, I think like any technology, its adoption, can be accelerated by external factors, effectively. So we're definitely seeing the adoption of decentralized identity at a completely different place now than it was maybe 2 years ago.
Oh, it's come that far, that
fast?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Organizations are starting to adopt this. An interesting case is it's not really Gen AI fraud per se, but we're seeing examples of companies where during the hiring process, they're interviewing people for jobs. They basically then, say, hey, give them a job offer. And it turns out the person that comes in on day one is a different person.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. And there's a number of examples of that occur.
Really?
So we're now talking about, basically using identity verification and a decentralized identity wallet and a credential in that wallet all the way back at the start of the interview process, where basically we establish it's Patrick and he's interviewing, and we give you a credential. And every time you do an interview, you show the credential to prove it's you, such that when we give you the job and you come into HR on the first day, you have to show that credential that it was you, and then we actually badge you and we actually give you a employee credential from there and stuff like that. So there's no break in the chain, so to speak,
right?
Because fraud's occurring in that situation too.
Patrick, I think you said it. A lot of good stuff. I thank you very much for sharing your expertise today.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.